Her son didn't raise his hand, just his voice. "Don't let her hold the baby, she drops things," Blake said, loud enough for the whole BBQ to hear. Elaine Hale, retired nurse and widow, didn't flinch. By the end of summer, his name would vanish from her trust, her will, and the deed to the coastal cabin. He'd spent years treating her like a burden. Now he'd feel the full weight of being left behind, and when he reached for her estate, the paperwork would be colder than the pie she served him. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The baby let out a tiny coo as Elaine reached forward, arms instinctively opening like muscle memory. The warmth of the late afternoon sun settled on her shoulders, the smell of grilled meat and charcoal clinging to the air. She'd barely grazed the edge of the crocheted blanket when her son's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. "Don't let her hold the baby. She drops things." The pause afterward was brutal. Then came the laughter. Easy, unbothered, careless. Even Marissa, her daughter-in-law, giggled behind her wine glass. "He's just teasing, Mom," she said without looking up. Elaine's hand hovered mid-air. She gave a soft, practiced smile, one she'd worn for years, and let it fall. Of course, wouldn't want to risk it. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. She drifted toward the food table, past cousins playing cornhole and the toddler tangled in bubbles, past the folding chairs sunken in patchy grass. A breeze rustled the paper napkins. Someone turned the music up, country twang and beer-soaked lyrics. She filled her plate without tasting a thing. Potato salad, deviled eggs, a rib she wouldn't finish. At the far edge of the yard, beneath the willow that once shaded Blake's childhood swing set, she sank into a lawn chair. The plastic creaked beneath her. No one noticed. Across the yard, Blake cradled the baby with ease, tossing him lightly in the air to more laughter. Marissa filmed it on her phone, her voice syrupy. "He's such a natural." Elaine pushed a fork into the egg, the yolk giving way too easily. Her hands, steady always, rested still in her lap. A tremble built in her chest, not physical, but old and deep, like something cracking quietly beneath the surface. A rustle beside her. Lexi, 16 and sharp-eyed, sank into the chair next to her without a word. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't looking at it. "You okay, Grandma?" Elaine forced a smile, but Lexi didn't buy it. "Your dad's got a cruel mouth sometimes," she murmured. Lexi didn't answer, but her silence felt like agreement. After a beat, she said, "You know I'd let you hold him." Elaine looked at her granddaughter. Freckles, stubborn chin, the spark of empathy Blake had long misplaced. And for a second, it eased something inside. "I know, honey." Lexi stood. "Want me to bring you dessert?" "No," Elaine said softly. "I've had enough sweetness for today." Lexi gave her a ghost of a smile, then wandered off, leaving Elaine with the buzzing of flies and the far-off crack of laughter. The party rolled on without her. That night, the house was silent, but for the hum of the fridge. Elaine set her purse on the entryway table and walked straight to the cabinet above the desk. She pulled down a dusty brown accordion folder, her estate file. It felt heavier than she remembered. Sitting at the kitchen table, she flipped it open. Her fingers found the tab labeled Trust, Current. She slid out the paperwork, flattened it beside her cup of untouched tea, and stared at the signature line beneath Blake's name. He was supposed to be the one who understood. He'd watched her build this life from scratch after his father died, watched her pay off the mortgage working double shifts, watched her go without so he could go to college. And now he couldn't even spare her dignity. Her hand moved to the drawer. She took out a yellow sticky note. With careful strokes, she wrote, "Reconsider everything." She pressed it against the front page of the trust document. The kettle began to whistle in the background, sharp and rising. Elaine didn't move. Elaine sat on the edge of her bed, phone in hand, the screen glowing cold against the soft golden light of her bedside lamp. The voicemail icon blinked like a quiet accusation. 4 new messages, all from Blake. She tapped Select All and hit Delete. No need to hear the half apologies, no curiosity left for, "Hey, just checking in," or the occasional, "Lexi wants to know if you're free next weekend." They weren't calling to ask anymore. Downstairs, the smell of warm vanilla clung to the air. The cookies had cooled hours ago. 3 dozen snickerdoodles stacked neatly in plastic containers, ribboned with care, labeled Lexi S. 11th grade fundraiser. She had even printed a little card with a watercolor apple on it. It sat unopened on the table, right where she'd left it by the door. Elaine stared at it for a long moment before opening her phone. The screen lit up with a new text from Marissa. "Oh, we forgot, sorry. Maybe next time." The emoji burned more than it should have. Elaine moved the containers to the counter. She didn't eat sweets much anymore, doctor's orders, but tonight she took 2 cookies, one after the other, chewing slowly. The cinnamon stung her tongue. Out the window, dusk settled gently over the cul-de-sac. Neighborhood kids raced past on bikes, laughter trailing behind them like a ribbon in the wind. Their parents chatted on porches, dogs barked, sprinklers hissed. Elaine's eyes followed the spinning wheels, the way a little boy swerved to avoid a pothole and then beamed at his mom like it was a great adventure. She remembered Blake at that age, wild brown curls and bruised knees. Back then, she worked the night shift at the ER, napped in bursts, and still managed to sew his Halloween costumes by hand. A dinosaur one year, a pirate the next. She had never dropped anything that mattered. Not until now, apparently. A slow ache bloomed in her chest. Not sadness, exactly. More like erosion, like something that had been there was quietly, steadily being worn away. She glanced toward the hallway. Her house was filled with framed moments, Blake's graduation, Lexi's first dance recital. Christmas mornings long past, but lately, it felt like she was walking through someone else's museum. She opened the hall closet. Legal folders tumbled slightly as she pulled one from the middle. Estate documents. The same one she'd sat with the night of the BBQ. She brought it to the dining table and set it down beside her tea. The folder creaked open. There was the sticky note again. Reconsider everything. She took a breath and reached into the folder, pulling out property records, deed titles, beneficiary forms. Some dated back to the 80s. Her fingers skimmed over the familiar language. Irrevocable trust, trustee authority, power of distribution. And there it was. Blake's name again, printed neatly in type. A hollow beat passed. Then she closed the folder and reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered only a moment before she opened a blank text and typed, "Hi, Ms. Brody. I need to update my trust. When can we meet?" She stared at it for a moment. No emojis, no softening, just the truth. Then she hit send. The elevator doors creaked open, and Elaine stepped into the narrow hallway with a sense of strange finality, like walking into a courthouse rather than a law office. The floor tiles were scuffed in places, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, but the air smelled clean, lemon polish and something else. Resolve, maybe. Her heels clicked against the linoleum as she approached the glass door, etched with Brody and Associates, estate law. The young receptionist looked up. "Mrs. Hale?" Elaine nodded, gripping her purse a little tighter. "She's expecting you. Last office on the right." Elaine walked past walls lined with framed degrees and cheerful "We can help" posters. But she wasn't here for help. Not anymore. She was here to draw a line in ink. Ms. Brody looked up as Elaine entered, her salt and pepper hair pulled into a neat twist, reading glasses perched low on her nose. "Elaine." She stood, warm but reserved, offering a firm handshake. "Come in, sit." The office was small but tidy. 2 chairs, a potted plant, the scent of eucalyptus oil rising faintly from a discreet diffuser in the corner. Elaine took her seat and laid the thick envelope on the desk like a loaded weapon. Ms. Brody raised an eyebrow. "You said this was urgent." Elaine didn't hesitate. "I want Blake removed. From everything." There was a pause. "That's a significant change." "I know what I'm saying." Her voice didn't shake. "Leave it all to Lexi. Every asset, property, the cabin, accounts, everything." Ms. Brody opened the envelope, glanced through the estate paperwork and notes. "You've left him as sole heir for the last 12 years. Are you absolutely certain?" Elaine leaned forward, voice low and measured. "I've been patient. Too patient. He's not the boy I raised. He's something else now. Something small. Cruel." Ms. Brody nodded, hands already moving to her keyboard. "Then let's make this bulletproof." The process began with a flurry of clauses and statute references. Words like revocation, disinheritance, successor trustee rolled off Ms. Brody's tongue like a surgeon naming arteries. Elaine followed every line. Together they reviewed each section: property transfers, power of attorney, healthcare directives. Everything had to be airtight, no loopholes for challenge, no room for guilt. Elaine reached into her bag and produced another envelope, sealed and stamped with her doctor's clinic insignia. "Medical clearance," she said, "signed last Thursday. Cognitive evaluation, neurocheck, the works. I wanted you to have it on record." Ms. Brody read it silently, then gave a firm nod. "Perfect. This'll bury any claim of coercion or mental decline." Elaine allowed herself a small exhale, like letting go of something heavy she'd carried for years. Ms. Brody printed out a draft and passed it across the desk. "Read it through tonight. We'll finalize next Friday. You can sign with a notary present." Elaine nodded, slipping the papers gently into her purse. "One more thing," she said, pulling out a second sheet. "I want to include a sealed letter for Lexi, with the estate file. Not legal, just personal." Ms. Brody smiled gently. "We'll notarize and attach it. It'll be part of the trust record." As Elaine stood to leave, her hands were steady, the kind of steadiness that came not from defiance, but from decision. Outside, the air had turned crisp. The sky was bruised with late-day clouds, and somewhere in the distance, a train passed, low and rumbling. In the parking lot, she sat for a moment behind the wheel, watching pedestrians bustle past the crosswalk. Life moved on, unaware, uncaring. But something inside her had shifted, not just a name in a file, but a reclamation of self. She unlocked her phone and opened a new text. Her fingers moved with quiet purpose. "Elaine, want to come bake pie on Saturday?" She hit send, then sat back in the driver's seat as the sky darkened, not with storm, but with certainty. Elaine's fingers moved over the cold butter with practiced precision, slicing it into cubes with a paring knife so sharp it whispered through the waxy yellow surface. Outside, wind brushed against the windows like a sigh, and the kitchen smelled of lemon zest, flour, and quiet defiance. She could still feel the weight of the trust documents in her purse, though she'd left them in the drawer by the hallway mirror. Today wasn't about signatures. It was about proof, not for the courts, but for Lexi. The doorbell rang, followed by the thump of sneakers on the porch. Elaine opened the door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Lexi stood there in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, earbuds draped around her neck, and a tote bag slung over one shoulder. "I brought lemons. The good kind," she said, lifting the bag like a trophy. Elaine smiled. "I'll be the judge of that." Inside, the kitchen lights glowed warmly against the soft gray of the sky outside. Lexi dropped her bag and washed her hands while Elaine pulled a deep ceramic bowl from the cupboard, the one with the faded blue rim and a tiny chip at the base. She set it down with the kind of finality that only came from tradition. "Ever made pie crust from scratch?" Elaine asked, rolling up her sleeves. Lexi blinked. "Do break and bake cookies count?" Elaine gave a mock scoff. "Lord, help this generation." They worked side by side at the counter, fingers dusted in flour, the wooden rolling pin moving back and forth in steady strokes. Elaine taught Lexi how to feel when the dough was just right, not too dry, not too sticky, and how to press it gently into the pan without tearing. "You make it look easy," Lexi said, watching her grandmother tuck the dough edges like muscle memory. Elaine's hands paused, the tips of her fingers still pressing the edge of the crust. "That's because it is. When you've done it enough times alone, you learn not to second-guess yourself." Lexi leaned her hip against the counter. "Is that what was wrong at the BBQ?" Elaine didn't answer right away. Instead, she sliced a lemon and handed it to Lexi. "Zest this one." Lexi grated in silence, the bright citrus oils filling the kitchen air. "Sometimes," Elaine said finally, voice light but sharp underneath, "people forget who fed them first. And sometimes you have to remind them." Lexi looked up. "Is that about Dad?" Elaine smiled faintly. "It's about whoever it needs to be." They mixed sugar, eggs, lemon juice, and a pinch of salt into a glossy filling. When the pie was in the oven, they sat at the kitchen table, sipping iced tea while the smell of baking lemon filled every corner of the house. Lexi pulled out her phone. "We should take a picture." Elaine laughed. "You want to document this historic event?" Lexi leaned in, cheek to cheek with her. The camera snapped. A few taps later, the post went up. Caption: "Steady hands." Within minutes, the likes started trickling in. A few family members commented with hearts and emojis. Then came Blake's reply. "Blake, cute. Just don't drop it." Elaine stared at the screen. The old ache flickered at the edge of her chest, not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. It was like hearing a joke that used to sting, now just tired. Lexi raised an eyebrow. "You okay?" Elaine stood and opened the oven to check the crust. Golden brown. Perfect. "Oh, I'm more than okay." She pulled the pie out with both hands, set it on the cooling rack, and didn't flinch once. Later that night, after Lexi had gone and the house had gone still again, Elaine wiped the counter clean and poured herself a cup of chamomile. Her phone buzzed. One new email, draft trust documents, review attached. She opened it without hesitation. Elaine sat across from Ms. Brody in the quiet corner office, sunlight pooling through the blinds in slanted gold bars. The trust documents lay in front of her like a clean slate, thick, crisp, and binding. "I want to be crystal clear," Elaine said, her voice calm but iron-laced. "Blake is to be removed from all current and future property entitlements. That includes the main house, the coastal cabin, and the mutual funds." Ms. Brody nodded, her tone respectful but firm. "This version names Lexi as sole beneficiary, trustee, and executor. No co-claims, no contest clause. Any legal challenge triggers forfeiture." Elaine tapped the edge of the parchment with one red-painted nail. "And the personal letter for Lexi? It stays with the trust? Notarized and sealed in the official file." Ms. Brody reached for the envelope already waiting beside the documents. "We'll include it in the vault version and attach a scanned copy to the official PDF." Elaine looked at the letter one last time before sliding it into the envelope herself. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, her stationery from the writing desk she almost never used. She folded it carefully. One page. No apologies. Just truth and legacy. Ms. Brody stamped it with a heavy notary seal and slid it into the trust folder. "Ready?" Elaine nodded. The pen moved smoothly over each signature line, her name flowing without hesitation. There were 7 places to sign, 1 to initial. By the time she finished, the weight in her chest had lifted, slow but certain, like rain stopping after days of gray. When the last seal was embossed, Ms. Brody looked up. "You're all set. Everything's filed, certified, and digitally backed up. There's no way for Blake to reverse this." Elaine exhaled slowly. "Now I can breathe in my own house again." She stood, adjusted the strap of her purse, and gave the room one final glance. It felt different leaving this time, like closing a door with the key in your own hand. Outside, the air was brisk and alive. Traffic moved like a tide through downtown, but Elaine took her time. She passed the florist, the hardware store, the bakery with the lemon bars she used to buy Blake as a boy. At the end of the block, she stepped into a home goods boutique with glass-paned doors and soft jazz playing overhead. "Looking for anything special?" the clerk asked. Elaine moved to the bakeware section, her eyes scanning the shelf until they landed on a heavy deep-dish ceramic pie pan in cobalt blue, etched with a floral rim. "This one," she said. "Can you gift wrap it?" Back home, she tucked the dish into her cabinet, still in its wrapping. A soft reminder. a symbol of what was hers to give, and what had been taken for granted too long. She brewed a cup of peppermint tea and opened the window to let in the scent of spring. The world outside looked ordinary, but inside, every room felt different, unburdened. Her phone buzzed against the table. A group text lit up the screen. Marissa, family dinner this Sunday, potluck style. Bring that famous lemon pie. Elaine stared at the message. Same smiley face, same tone, as if nothing had happened, as if the humiliation at the last BBQ had evaporated with the smoke from the grill. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she walked to the drawer, opened it, and stared at the trust folder, thick, final, and indisputable. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at her mouth. It was the kind that came with a plan. She took a sticky note from the side of the fridge and scribbled just one thing: pie plus papers. Elaine pulled into the driveway, the same gravel crunching beneath her tires that had welcomed her to 100 family dinners before. The pie sat on the passenger seat, nestled in a towel. The envelope rested beside it, thick, cream-colored, heavy with finality. She turned off the ignition and sat for a moment, watching the silhouettes moving in the backyard. Laughter drifted through the trees, tangled with the sizzle of the grill and the scent of burgers and hickory smoke. Elaine opened the door slowly. The pie was warm against her palms, the ceramic dish still gift-wrapped beneath the foil. She slipped the envelope under it and walked up the side gate. "Elaine!" someone called from the patio. It was Marissa, holding a drink and wearing her usual glassy, performative smile. "You made it!" Elaine returned a small nod, walked through the garden path, and emerged into the backyard without ceremony. The familiar chaos of Sunday dinner surrounded her. A cousin was chasing a toddler with a juice box. An aunt she barely recognized was talking too loud. Blake stood at the grill, flipping ribs with tongs in one hand, a beer in the other. He saw her, smiled like nothing had ever happened. "There she is. Got the famous pie?" Elaine walked up to the table, cleared a space between the paper plates and solo cups, and set the pie down. Then, without looking at anyone else, she placed the envelope neatly beside it, right in front of Blake. "What's that?" he asked, eyebrows raised as he wiped his hands on a towel. "A card?" Marissa chirped. "Ooh, is this one of your little memory letters?" Blake opened the flap casually, still half focused on the grill. But the moment the first page appeared, his face stiffened. His eyes flicked left to right, then again, slower. The laughter around them didn't stop, not at first, but something in Blake's expression began to freeze the air. He stared at the document like it might catch fire. "This," he started. "What is this?" Elaine folded her hands gently in front of her, her voice low but unwavering. "That's what a mother does when she's been pushed one insult too far." He looked up, color draining from his face. You rewrote the trust?" Several relatives nearby quieted. Conversations paused like a radio fading out. Blake's tone turned sharp. "You're cutting me out?" Elaine tilted her head slightly. "I'm correcting an assumption." "You're joking," Marissa said, stepping forward now, her voice higher, tighter. "You're bluffing. You can't just—" Elaine turned to her, slow and deliberate. "He mocked me in front of my family. You laughed. No one thought twice, not even after. That envelope? It's real. It's notarized, filed, certified, and witnessed." "You're doing this over a joke?" Blake snapped. Elaine's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "It was never just a joke. It was every time you overlooked me, every time you made me feel like a burden instead of your mother." The grill hissed behind him. Blake was still holding the document, but now his hand was trembling. "She can't do this," Marissa said under her breath, turning toward an uncle like she was searching for backup. Elaine's gaze didn't move from Blake. "Don't worry. The pie is still for you. The recipe hasn't changed." Blake looked at the dish like it might bite him. Lexi stood off to the side now, arms folded across her chest. She hadn't said a word, but her eyes were on Elaine, watching, understanding. "What the hell are we supposed to do with this?" Blake asked, voice cracking slightly. Elaine leaned in just enough to say, "You can read it. Or ignore it. Either way, the decision's already made." The silence stretched, long and taut, until Marissa stepped in again, this time more forcefully. "You're bluffing," she said again. "There's no way this holds up. Not legally. Not in court." Elaine blinked once, then gave the faintest of smiles. Marissa's words still hung in the humid air, clinging like smoke. But Elaine's fingers were already inside her purse, steady and slow, like someone used to being underestimated. She pulled out the folder. Not thick, not flashy, just a simple navy leather file with a brass button. She undid the clasp, slid the documents out, and laid them on the patio table, right between the lemonade pitcher and a bowl of uneaten potato salad. Everyone went quiet. "This," she said clearly, "is the revised trust. Notarized. Final. Filed with my attorney. Attached are medical records affirming I am of sound mind. Clearer now than I've been in years, in fact." Marissa crossed her arms. "This is spite. That's all this is." Elaine's gaze never wavered. "Number. This is structure. This is clarity. This is a long overdue correction." Blake's face flushed deep red. His voice shook with rising panic. "You're doing this over one stupid joke? Over a line I didn't even mean?" Elaine stepped closer, the edge of her heels clicking on the pavers. "You think it's about one moment? That comment was just the last brick in a wall you've been stacking for years, out of disregard, mockery, and forgetfulness." "Forgetfulness?" he scoffed. "We invite you, don't we? We bring you into everything." "You tolerate me," she said, quiet but firm. "You laugh at me, not with me. I show up with cookies that don't get picked up, stories that don't get heard, a presence you treat like background noise." From the other end of the yard, a child cried out briefly, and someone turned the music down. But in the center of the patio, everything felt sharp and still. Marissa's tone turned cold. "You'll regret this. Maybe not today, but you will, when you're old and alone." Elaine studied her, then smiled. Not bitter, but tired. "I've been lonely for years, Marissa," she said softly. "Lonely in rooms full of people. That's the worst kind." Lexi stood now, arms crossed, her eyes flicking between the adults. But she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Elaine picked up her purse. Her pie sat untouched on the table, still warm. She looked at it for half a second. The perfect crust, the subtle sheen of sugar glaze. Then she turned to Blake. "It was your favorite growing up," she said. "But I see now, some things don't carry flavor into adulthood." She didn't wait for a response. Elaine walked back down the garden path with the same grace she'd entered, but lighter now, unburdened. The pie remained behind, like a monument to what had once mattered, now stripped of sentiment. Her car door creaked as she slid in. The engine hummed to life. As she backed out of the driveway, she didn't look in the rearview mirror once. The house was still when she arrived home. The kind of quiet that usually felt suffocating, but tonight it settled around her like soft wool. She walked through the hallway, eyes scanning the photos on the walls. Blake in overalls at age 3, a Polaroid of him at his high school graduation, the Christmas morning where he'd cried over his first bike. Elaine stood there for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached up, took down the photo of 5-year-old Blake holding his first baseball glove, and slid it out of its frame. She held it in her hand, her face unreadable. The sound of tearing paper echoed through the hallway. The letter arrived by courier, thick cream paper with sharp black print, sealed in formality and contempt. Elaine unfolded it slowly at the kitchen table, her tea going cold beside her. Blake had filed a legal challenge, claiming undue influence, mental instability, coercion by Lexi. She stared at the words, her jaw tightening. Her son wasn't just angry, he was desperate. An hour later, she sat across from Ms. Brody again, this time with less ceremony. The attorney flipped through the complaint without a shred of concern. "He's grasping at straws," she said, underlining a phrase with her pen. These accusations fall apart in seconds. We have your full cognitive evaluation, dated video documentation of our meetings, and a digital audit trail showing your independent communication with this office. Elaine didn't respond immediately. She just looked down at the copy of the complaint, one phrase repeating in bold, "acting under emotional duress and familial pressure." She let out a long breath. He thinks he can shout over the facts. He's never been in a real courtroom, Ms. Brody said dryly, pushing the folder aside. He'll learn fast. And he did. 2 weeks later, the case was dismissed in probate court. No standing, no merit. Elaine didn't need to attend. Ms. Brody handled everything, and the judge's ruling was swift. But the fallout came faster than the gavel. Elaine's phone rang that same evening, a quiet, choked sob on the other end before a word was spoken. "Grandma?" Lexi's voice was cracked and barely above a whisper. Elaine froze. "I'm here, baby. What's wrong?" "I just found out. Dad's trying to take you to court. Said you weren't thinking straight, that I put you up to it." She sniffled. "He told Aunt Carla I manipulated you. He's telling people I'm stealing." Elaine stood up from the couch, heart pounding but voice steady. "Listen to me. None of that matters. You didn't steal anything. You earned what he assumed was his." "But why would he say that about me?" Lexi's voice broke. "Why would he hurt you, and then act like I did it?" Elaine closed her eyes. The pain in Lexi's voice cut deeper than any filing or accusation. "Because entitlement screams the loudest when it's told no." There was a long pause. Elaine added softly, "No one can erase what's been earned, Lex. Not in court, not in rumor, not in blood." On the other end, Lexi exhaled. I wanted you to know I'd never want your money. I just wanted you." "I know," Elaine said. "That's why you deserve it." The next morning, Blake's name was back in the local rumor mill. Not as an heir, but as a man who'd tried to sue his own mother and lost. Elaine overheard the whispers at the market, saw the Facebook threads, watched as his old glow of self-assuredness flickered into something hollow. Credit cards didn't go as far now. The handouts stopped coming. Marissa's SUV was up for sale within the week, and Blake's carefully curated image, the dependable family man, had developed a noticeable crack. Elaine didn't celebrate it, but she didn't pity it either. Actions had consequences. He'd just never expected hers to have teeth. She spent the next few days organizing the linen closet, going through old recipe cards, trimming the hydrangeas. The quiet felt earned now. Not empty, but deliberate. Then, one afternoon as she was watering the hanging plants on the porch, her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. Area code from the coast. "Mrs. Hale?" a man's voice asked. "Speaking." "This is Thomas Mendel from Shoreline Property Management. Just a quick question. You still own that coastal cabin, right?" Elaine paused, her eyes drifting to the small framed photo of the ocean tucked in her kitchen windowsill. "I do." "Well," he said, clearing his throat. "We have a proposal you might want to hear." The gate creaked open, brittle from salt air and years of neglect. Elaine stepped through slowly, one hand brushing the sea-damp railing, the other clutching the keys she hadn't used in almost a decade. The cabin still stood, stubborn against the Atlantic wind. Its shingles had faded from crisp gray to a sun-bleached silver, and ivy crept up the side like time trying to reclaim it. But the bones were solid, just like her. She drew in a breath. Sand, pine, ocean. The air here smelled like freedom, like something she'd buried under years of obligation and silence. The front door stuck a little but gave way with a groan. Inside, dust blanketed everything. Counters, windowsills, old bookshelves, still half-stocked with paperbacks from the 90s. The light through the salt-specked windows caught in floating particles, and for a moment, Elaine stood in the center of the room and let it all wash over her. She could still see it. Blake, barefoot and sunburned at 6, dragging in seaweed from the shore. Her late husband playing guitar on the deck. the nights when the electricity cut out and they lit candles and told ghost stories. Then, nothing. Years of silence, years of being too busy, too tired, too forgotten. But not anymore. By the weekend, the cabin hummed with life again. Lexi stood barefoot on a step stool in the kitchen, hair tied back, elbow deep in a bucket of warm, soapy water. "We need to keep this place," she said between scrubs. "This feels like home, like ours." Elaine smiled from the living room where she was stacking books into donation boxes and shaking out old throw blankets. "That's the plan." Outside, fresh white paint covered half the front porch already. A contractor's truck idled in the driveway, radio playing soft classic rock. "Do you remember coming here when you were little?" Elaine called. Lexi wrinkled her nose. "Barely. I remember you chasing a raccoon off the deck with a broom, though." Elaine laughed, the sound fuller than it had been in months. He had it coming. That afternoon, they sat on the back steps eating tuna sandwiches and watching the tide roll in. The sky was streaked pink and lavender, the ocean loud and unbothered. Elaine handed Lexi a folded paper, a notarized addendum. Lexi blinked. "What's this?" "You're now the successor trustee on the cabin's deed," Elaine said gently. "If anything happens to me, it's yours. No red tape, no court nonsense. Just yours." Lexi looked up, eyes shining. "Grandma, why are you doing all this for me?" Elaine's voice didn't waver. "Because you saw me when no one else did, and you stood beside me when it wasn't easy." The silence between them was warm, anchored by shared trust. Then her phone buzzed, a sharp intrusion, a message from Marissa. "Marissa, so you're moving into the woods now? Hope the raccoons are friendlier than your will." Elaine didn't hesitate. She pressed down on the number, hit block, and dropped the phone onto the deck beside her. "I'm not available for sarcasm today," she muttered. Lexi smirked. "She really texted you that?" Her and her emojis are no longer my problem. That evening, as Elaine sliced lemons in the kitchen for fresh tea, Lexi came bounding in from the deck, waving her phone. "Grandma, I got in!" Elaine turned, heart catching. "Into where?" Lexi was glowing. "Columbia. Full acceptance. I thought it was a long shot, but they want me." Elaine felt something crack open inside, something tender and proud and ancient. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, pulling her granddaughter into her arms. Lexi pulled back. "Wait, how will I afford—" Elaine held up a finger, then opened the drawer beside the fridge. She handed over a signed co-signer approval form, official, sealed, ready. Lexi's mouth fell open. "You all ready?" Elaine nodded. "I believe in you. Always have." That night, Elaine sat by the fireplace with her trust documents in her lap. One last amendment, printed and signed. Lexi's name at the top, executor of the full estate. Blake's name wasn't anywhere on the page. The notary's pen clicked once, then again, sealing the final line with a smooth stroke. Elaine watched the ink settle into the paper like a permanent exhale. It was done. Lexi sat beside her at the polished oak table in Ms. Brody's office, still holding the folded acceptance letter from Columbia, like it was a fragile piece of magic. Her eyes were glassy, unsure whether to smile or cry. "You didn't have to do all this," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "College, the cabin, everything." Elaine reached over and touched her hand gently. "I did. Because you saw me when I was invisible. That kind of loyalty isn't inherited, it's chosen." Across the desk, Ms. Brody handed Elaine a stamped copy of the newly amended estate. Lexi, 100%, executor, sole beneficiary, all rights and titles transferred on death without contest. Blake's name was nowhere in the document. "I'll file this with the county clerk today," Ms. Brody said, sliding a second folder toward Elaine. "It's airtight. Final." Elaine nodded. Her voice stayed steady, but there was something in her chest. Not relief, not glee, something closer to restoration. Back in the neighborhood, the subtle absence had grown loud. For months now, Blake's car hadn't been in her driveway. The weekends came and went without drop-ins or excuses. no forgotten cookie pickups, no sarcastic texts. The neighbors had started to notice. "Blake doing all right?" one asked gently as she walked her dog past Elaine's front yard. Elaine just smiled, trimmed a rose bush, and replied, "He's finding his own footing." She didn't owe more than that. What she gave freely. What she withheld, she now understood, was a boundary, not a punishment. That Saturday, the house smelled like chamomile and cardamom. Sunlight streaked through the lace curtains as the kettle whistled and the screen door clacked open, letting in the soft sounds of wind and birdsong. Elaine moved through the kitchen in her favorite apron, one she hadn't worn since her husband's memorial service. On the counter, a simple tray of scones, lemon curd, blackberry jam, a polished silver teapot that hadn't seen the light in years. 3 of her old friends sat in the garden, fanning themselves under wide hats and talking about tulips, grandkids, and the rising cost of butter. Elaine joined them quietly, her teacup warm in her hand. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was hers, a kind of peace that didn't need to be explained. One of the women leaned in and said, "You look lighter, happier." Elaine smiled. "I feel like I just got my name back." Later that evening, as golden light stretched long across the floorboards, Elaine stood in the front room tidying up the empty teacups. Outside wind rustled the oak leaves. A cardinal chirped near the porch. Then, crunch, gravel. She froze, setting the tray down. Through the front window, she saw him. Blake, standing at the edge of the driveway, hands shaking, eyes scanning the porch like he didn't know whether to approach or flee. He looked smaller than she remembered, not younger, just unmoored. Elaine didn't move. She didn't reach for the door, didn't call his name. She watched and waited. Elaine opened the screen door slowly, its springs groaning like it too wanted to resist this moment. Blake didn't step forward. His hands trembled slightly, the same hands she used to hold steady when he first learned to walk. Now they hung useless by his sides, palms open as if pleading might be enough. "I saw your car," he said, voice rough. "Took me a minute to get out." Elaine said nothing, just stared at him. The son who had mocked her hands, her worth, her silence. The man who'd tried to legally unravel the very roof she'd built over his head for years. He cleared his throat. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. I was just stressed. You know how things get." Elaine's gaze didn't flinch. "Number I don't." He shifted his weight, as if the driveway beneath him had turned hostile. "I was juggling a lot. Work, the baby, Marissa." "You were comfortable," she interrupted, her voice like polished stone. "And I was convenient. That's not stress. That's neglect dressed up as busy." His eyes glistened, but not from tears, from fear. "Please," he said, stepping onto the first step of the porch. "We're family. We can fix this. Just put me back in the trust. You don't even have to tell anyone." Elaine took a slow breath. The porch between them felt more like a canyon. "Family listens," she said. "You mocked. Family honors. You erased." Blake's shoulders sank. "Lexi doesn't even—" he started, but stopped as the door creaked open behind Elaine. Lexi stepped out barefoot, holding a glass of lemonade. When she saw him, she froze. Blake opened his mouth to speak, but Lexi turned quietly and walked back inside without a word. That silence rang louder than any accusation. Elaine stepped forward, a foil-covered pie dish in her hands. She extended it toward him. Blake looked at it, confused. "What's this?" Elaine peeled back the foil slightly. "Lemon pie. Golden, perfect, still warm, the same recipe from childhood." "This," she said, placing it in his hands, "is the only thing you'll be receiving from me now." His lips parted, but the words didn't come. Elaine leaned in just enough for him to feel the weight of it. "I made it from scratch, with steady hands." He looked down at the pie like it burned him. "You don't mean this," he whispered. "I meant every word of that trust," she replied. "This is not punishment. This is clarity." He gripped the pie tighter, like maybe it was a lifeline. "So that's it?" Elaine tilted her head. Number that's dessert. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind lifted slightly, rustling the wind chimes beside the porch. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed faintly. The sun threw long shadows across the garden path. Blake stepped back slowly, as if the weight in his arms was too much. The pie, the silence, the loss, all finally real. Elaine didn't follow him. She didn't ask him to understand. Some lessons don't come with second helpings. He turned, shoulders slouched, and walked back to his car. Inside, Elaine stood by the door for a long time, staring at the space where he had stood, the shadow of him still clinging to the railing. The pie was gone, and so was the illusion that blood would always be thicker than character. Next morning, Elaine sat on a blanket spread over the grassy dunes behind the cabin, the pie tin between her and Lexi holding the last slice, lemon, just barely warm, the crust still flaking beneath their forks. The salt air danced through their hair, carrying with it the scent of ocean and citrus and calm. Lexi took a bite and sighed. "It's perfect." Elaine smiled, brushing a crumb from her lap. "I think I finally found the right balance of zest." "You always had it," Lexi said. "You just stopped making it for people who didn't deserve it." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, earned, as Elaine would later call it, the kind of quiet that follows hard truth and deeper healing. They tapped their cups of tea together like a toast. "To clean slates," Elaine said, her voice light. "And to love that doesn't keep score." Lexi lifted her cup. "And to steady hands." Elaine took a sip and looked out at the water. For the first time in years, her shoulders didn't feel like they were holding up someone else's life. The space around her, the very air itself, felt wider, like the world had finally made room for her peace. Later that afternoon, she returned to the small desk in the corner of the cabin. The drawer creaked as she opened it, pulling out her will. She flipped to the final page, already notarized and bound, but now she added a single sentence in her neat, looping handwriting. "If this document is legally challenged for any reason, all assets listed shall be redirected in full to the Coastal Environmental Trust. No room for manipulation, no loopholes." It wasn't just protection, it was punctuation. Elaine sealed it in a fresh envelope and filed it beside Lexi's college paperwork and the deed transfer forms. Then she opened the window and let the wind take the edge off the late afternoon sun. Outside, Lexi was sketching something on a notepad, blueprints for her dorm maybe, or plans for painting the cabin's guest room. Her head was tilted, brow furrowed, but there was something new in her expression. Freedom. The kind of freedom that comes when no one is pulling your strings, when the people you love don't demand a performance for approval. Elaine stepped outside with 2 fresh glasses of lemonade. "I thought you hated drawing," she said, handing one to Lexi. "I did," Lexi replied, smirking. "Then I realized I only hated it because he always told me I wasn't doing it right." Elaine nodded knowingly. "People like that don't want to teach. They want to control." "I want to be an architect," Lexi said suddenly, eyes gleaming. "Not just interior, actual buildings, homes." Elaine took a long drink, the tartness bright on her tongue. "Then build every room with your own name carved into the beams." The cabin felt more alive now than it ever had. Windows thrown open, vases full of wildflowers, music playing softly in the background. No footsteps waiting to correct, no voices undercutting laughter. Just light and breath and space to become something new. As the sun dipped low, painting the water in gold and blush, Elaine turned to Lexi and smiled. "You know what I'm thinking?" Lexi leaned back, lazy in the warmth. "What?" Elaine's smile turned sly, playful in a way it hadn't been in years. "Let's host a real family BBQ. Just us." Elaine stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching the folding tables take shape in the backyard like an altar to something new. The scent of barbecue drifted up from the smoker. Kids laughed as they chased bubbles through the tall grass. Lexi was stringing lights across the trellis with the help of a neighbor's teenage son. There were no name cards, no forced smiles, no obligatory hellos. This table was hers, every chair filled by invitation, not inheritance. She carried out the lemonade pitcher herself, setting it down next to a plate of lemon bars. Her lemon bars. Same recipe, new audience. On either side of the table sat people who had shown up when it wasn't easy. Her next-door neighbor who shoveled her driveway last winter without asking, Lexi's biology teacher who wrote her the college recommendation letter no one else offered to, the florist from town who always slipped in an extra stem. They'd gathered not out of duty, but because they cared, because they saw her. Elaine hadn't worn anything fancy, just her favorite navy dress, soft at the shoulders, and a pair of sandals that let her feel the cool grass beneath her toes. Her hair was pulled back with a clip Lexi gave her for Mother's Day, the kind of small gift that meant everything. The table buzzed with overlapping conversation. Someone telling a story about a disastrous camping trip, someone else mimicking the snore of their spouse, and laughter, not the brittle, polite kind, but deep-bellied, joy-filled noise. Elaine felt it in her bones, the absence of judgment, of cold glances, of comparison. It was the first family gathering in years that didn't require her to shrink. A small voice cut through the hum. "Excuse me," a curly-haired toddler said shyly, tugging on her dress. "Can you hold him?" The boy looked up, holding out his baby brother in both arms like a treasure. Elaine blinked, startled. "Me?" The mother standing nearby smiled. "He insists, says you have grandma arms." Elaine bent down, hands out. The baby came easily into her arms, soft, warm, trusting. The crowd didn't stop to notice. They didn't pause to whisper, but someone nearby, watching, murmured with a chuckle, "Your grip's strong, Elaine." She looked up, face full of mischief. "I haven't dropped anything important yet." Laughter rippled again, effortless. The baby cooed in her arms, pressing his cheek to her shoulder. She swayed slightly, heart fuller than it had been in years. Click. Someone had snapped a photo. Lexi, holding her phone, eyes glistening. "Keep that one," Elaine said. "It finally looks like me." As the sun dipped low and the lights Lexi strung began to glow golden, the party settled into warmth, like a song winding down, still sweet in its last notes. Elaine sat on a wooden bench beneath the tree with a paper plate in her lap, a half-eaten slice of peach pie beside her. Lexi sat beside her, legs crossed at the ankle, her cheeks still flushed from laughing too hard earlier. They didn't speak for a while. Then Lexi leaned in, voice low so only Elaine could hear. "You made something beautiful out of something broken." Elaine looked out at the table, still full, still alive with laughter, the only family that mattered anymore. She squeezed Lexi's hand. The phone buzzed once, then twice, then again, a stubborn vibration against the kitchen counter. Elaine didn't move. The caller ID flashed. Blake, mobile. She watched the screen go dark. Voicemail. Again. From the table, Lexi glanced up from her laptop. "You sure?" Elaine sipped her tea, the steam curling toward the open window. Outside, birds chirped like nothing in the world needed fixing. "I'm sure," she said, setting the cup down gently. "Forgiveness doesn't require access." Lexi didn't press. She didn't need to. Elaine stood, her hands steady, and walked to the writing desk tucked into the corner of the living room. The cabin light poured in soft and honeyed across the wood grain. She opened the drawer and pulled out the deed transfer envelope, addressed, notarized, and sealed the week before. Inside it, formal notice that the coastal property, once Blake's presumed inheritance, had been officially transferred into her trust and designated to Lexi irrevocably. No more legal gray, no more loopholes, just ink and finality. Elaine slipped it into the outgoing mailbox at the end of the gravel path. No ceremony, no second-guessing, just a quiet walk and a firmer return. Later that night, as she folded fresh towels in the laundry room, her phone buzzed again. One new message. "Marissa, you'll regret this. Maybe not today, but you will. We always do." Elaine didn't even open it fully. Her thumb hovered a moment, then tapped delete. No hesitation, no curiosity, just release. She stood there, the hum of the dryer behind her, the faint scent of lavender rising from the fabric. The silence in the house was thick, but no longer empty. It was a new kind of stillness, one she had crafted from clarity and hard choices, the kind that didn't echo with absence but settled into peace. She returned to the kitchen, her hands grazing the edge of the wooden table. A pie dish sat clean and empty on the windowsill, waiting for the next gathering. The lemon tree out back swayed gently, green leaves dancing against the last breath of daylight. Lexi had gone to bed early, already tucked away with college brochures and Sharpies marking the margins of her dreams. Elaine moved slowly through the hallway, her fingers trailing against the walls, no longer filled with old photographs of the past, but fresh canvas waiting for whatever came next. At the end of the hall, she paused. The small cabinet beside her bedroom door hadn't been touched in months. She opened it and pulled out a fresh leather-bound journal, a gift she'd given herself and never dared to start. Until now. She sat on the edge of her bed, legs crossed, and flipped open the first page. The pen felt cool between her fingers. In slow, careful handwriting, she titled it, "Things I Held Without Ever Dropping." Then beneath it, in smaller script, faith, memory, boundaries, myself. She set the pen down and exhaled, not out of exhaustion, but completion. Outside, the stars stretched wide over the sea, unbothered, eternal. The soil was darker than Lexi expected, rich, damp, and fragrant with the scent of fresh earth and possibility. Elaine knelt beside her in old jeans and gardening gloves, a small lemon sapling balanced carefully between them like something sacred. It was early morning, and the world still held its hush. Fog clung to the tree line in the distance, and the only sounds were birdsong and the slow rustle of wind brushing the sea grass. Elaine rested the trowel on her knee. "Here," she said softly, holding out a folded piece of paper in a plastic sleeve. Lexi took it. When she opened it, her breath caught. It was the original trust document, the one with Blake's name printed in bold, unchallenged type, the one that had once been his future by default. "Are you sure you want to bury this?" Lexi asked, voice low. Elaine gave a quiet nod. "We don't burn things in this family," she said. "We plant them. Let them rot into something better." Together, they lowered the old trust into the hole, laying it beneath the roots like an offering to the past. Then Lexi held the sapling straight, while Elaine packed soil around the base, her hands surprisingly strong, unshaking. With every scoop, the past settled deeper into the ground, and something brighter pushed upward. "I used to think this land would pass down like a torch," Elaine murmured, brushing soil from her fingers. "Now I know it's more like a mirror. It reflects the ones ready to carry it." Lexi sat back on her heels. "Do you think he'll ever get it? That this wasn't revenge?" Elaine pressed a hand to the soil, patting it gently. "Maybe one day. Maybe never. But this isn't about what he understands. It's about what I finally did." They sat in silence for a moment, the lemon tree standing proud and small between them. Elaine reached into her flannel pocket and handed Lexi a sealed envelope. "What's this?" "A letter," Elaine said, looking at her without flinching. "For you. For after." Lexi opened it slowly, careful not to tear the edges. Inside, a short handwritten note, "Never question your worth, even if they do. Especially if they do." Grandma Lexi didn't speak. Her throat tightened, her fingers clutching the note like it might disappear. Elaine stood, brushing off her knees. "Come on, we've got a photo to take." They gathered beneath the new lemon tree, Elaine, Lexi, and the small circle of chosen family who had become the real roots, the neighbors who showed up with extra mulch, the friends who helped sand the porch railings, Lexi's classmate who painted the mural on the cabin's side wall. The camera clicked. No forced smiles, no hidden bruises behind polite grins, just light and arms slung over shoulders, and the kind of joy that doesn't perform for anyone. After everyone left, Elaine brewed 2 cups of tea and carried them out to the porch. She sipped hers slowly, the citrus blending with chamomile on her tongue, the breeze brushing her face. Lexi sat beside her, journal open on her lap, sketching the tree, its thin trunk, its hopeful branches. Elaine watched the sun begin to rise. Not in metaphor, but in quiet golds and oranges stretching across the horizon like an apology she no longer needed. She picked up her own journal, ran her hand over the leather cover, and flipped to the final page. With her pen poised, she wrote one last sentence beneath all the others. They said, "I dropped things, but I never dropped myself."